In November 2023, I decided I would review one of the longest series of movies of all time, Shintaro Katsu's Zatoichi movies. I honestly didn't even think anyone would watch, but I have received a lot of support from the Zatoichi fanbase, so it is incredibly satisfying to be able to present to you the fourth and final episode in the series of reviews. This episode got everything. The movies are a lot more serious, but they still manage to be fun, and since it's the last episode, we rank all 23 plus 1 movies in the series, so if you're interested in that, you should probably watch until the end. Okay, enough talk. Cue the intro. Samaritan Zatoichi. Kenji Misumi is back behind the camera in this new chapter of Zatoichi's journey. Samaritan Zatoichi is yet another story following Zatoichi in another corner of Japan. This time, the blind swordsman is tricked into collecting a debt for a criminal. He ends up killing a somewhat innocent man. Realizing his mistake, Zatoichi decides to protect the dead man's sister, who was the Yakuza's target all along. Now, we have seen this type of stories before in this series. Zatoichi's pilgrimage has a very similar plot where Zatoichi kills a guy, then bonds with the man's sister, which is kind of messed up when you think about it. But here, they actually managed to make it work. It's a lot less weird. Actually, it's not weird at all. First of all, they completely abandon the romance aspect of it. The sister doesn't fall in love with him like what happened in Zatoichi's pilgrimage, and there is a very interesting sequence in this. See, Zatoichi saves Okode, the sister, from the criminals trying to abduct her. Then they share a room, then they start to bond until she slowly starts to remember that at the end of the day, this bastard still murdered her brother, and she tries to murder the guy in his sleep. I wish they pushed this narrative a little further. I mean, it was just that one sequence, then she immediately forgives him in the very next scene. But I'm still glad that there was some sort of conflict at the very least, because nobody just forgives their brother's killer without a second thought. It was one of my biggest problems with Zatoichi's pilgrimage. The rest of the movie is this small group of criminals looking for the girl and Zatoichi trying to keep her safe. It was entertaining for the most part until sometime before the final act. The movie kind of falls apart narratively. About 45 minutes into the movie, you realize that there is no real antagonist, at least not one that can be considered a real threat. They had to insert this samurai in order for Ichi to have someone to fight at the end, but he always felt out of place. There was never a sense of danger, neither for Ichi nor for the girl he was protecting. These bandits were not looking for her to kill her. They wanted to give her to some government guy. In other words, this movie has no tension whatsoever, and therefore, about halfway through the second act, I lost interest in the movie completely. Yeah, it completely lost me, I'm sorry. If there is one thing I will give this movie though, it has some great visual ideas. I love the trippy dream sequences that felt like something right out of Kurosawa's Kagemusha. I loved once again the use of snow to give a scene a great atmosphere. The series has done that quite often and it never gets old. And I absolutely love the use of natural light in the final battle. It made the scene feel authentic and badass. The movie itself looks amazing and it's quite funny at times. Shintaro Katsu as always delivers another fantastic performance as Zatoichi, even though he really didn't have anyone to support him as the rest of the cast is pretty forgettable in this one. I'm going to give Samaritan Zatoichi a 6 out of 10. Moving on, Zatoichi meets Yojimbo. This was by far my most anticipated Zatoichi film yet. If you have been around this channel, then you know how big of a fan I am of Toshiro Mifune and how much I loved his character Sanjuro from Yojimbo. Having him cross over with Zatoichi was always going to get me excited. The first thing worth mentioning about this crossover is that it is the longest Zatoichi film ever at this point in time. His movies normally are usually around 80 to 90 minutes long. This movie being nearly 2 hours long was a first for this franchise. And you can say it's justifiable given how big of an event this must have been at the time. The magnitude of this film is also proven by the fact that the franchise literally had to take a break just to prepare for this event. Ever since the first film, there was always at least 3 films a year, and most of the time it was 4 films a year. That was the norm throughout the 60s. However, after Samaritan Zatoichi in 1968, there was no Zatoichi movie released until this one in 1970. Almost 2 years later, the movie follows Zatoichi as he goes back to his hometown. There, he realizes a lot had changed and that his town is being terrorized by a Yakuza gang. Zatoichi will do what he does best, trying to look out for the innocent, and on the other hand, he encounters the gang boss's bodyguard, who has been instructed to kill Zatoichi. As any crossover, they are expected to end up on the same side, and that's what ends up happening, of course. However, it does not happen as predictably as anticipated. Zatoichi and Sasa? Yeah, Sanjuro is called Sasa in this movie for some reason, but I'm assuming he's still using different names to cover up his true identity. I don't know. I mean, Sanjuro is not even his real name. He's always been a Ronin with no name, and I guess he's Sasa here. But I'm not calling him that, sorry. So anyway, Zatoichi and Sanjuro have the same type of code. They both care about this woman named Umeno. They both despise these gangsters to the point that at some point in the film they decide to play 2 camps off against one another, which is Sanjuro's specialty. I appreciated that callback, but they never truly bond or become friends. Actually, they came really close to fighting to the death at the end if it wasn't for Umeno surviving her wounds. At the end, they gained respect for each other, but one thing remained clear: they don't like each other. And I thought that worked well for both characters. Their personalities are just way too different for them to truly get along. At the beginning, I thought they were changing the character of Sanjuro, and I was terrified that he was going to act out of character, especially given how much more comedic he is here.
Sensei! Shinshi! Sensei! Shinshi!
But at the end, he was still that good old Sanjuro that I loved to root for. And Toshiro Mifune gets plenty of opportunities to shine, and he's got great chemistry with Shintaro Katsu. Every scene they had together was captivating. With all that being said, this movie overall is kind of a disappointment. It tries too hard to be more cinematic than the other entries, but it ends up being a drag. They do not make good use of the runtime. Kan Shimozawa returns to write the script, and we know he can write a compelling story just as he has in the past, but I don't know what he was trying to achieve with these many characters and subplots. This movie would have benefited from a straightforward plot where we just get to see 2 of our favorite heroes team up. Instead, we got characters appearing and disappearing with each of them having their own motives, and following all of them all at once just made the whole movie messy in my opinion. It feels like there was a 4-hour movie that was cut down to 2 hours, and that's a real shame because I truly believe there's an amazing movie in there somewhere, but this final product is not it. I know I sound negative, but I still enjoy this crossover a lot. Akira Ifukube returned to score another Zatoichi film, and I thought the music was fantastic. The movie did not need something distracting or too energetic, and Ifukube delivered once again a score that was subtle and fitting. Kiichi Okamoto directs this very cinematic looking film, and for someone who had never directed a Zatoichi movie before, I love the choice of making the blood pop on screen to the extent that whenever anyone gets hurt, you feel it. I've mentioned before during these reviews that I believe blood and violence enhances these movies, and I always hated when these movies tried too hard to be PG. So I appreciated that Okamoto chose to make this movie bloody and sufficiently violent. However, the cinematography here just sucks, man. I'm sorry. This movie is just way too damn dark. There were times I literally had to rewind because I had no idea what I was looking at. At times, there were weird camera placements where some of the choices for the camera angles were just odd. The fight scenes, while bloody, did not put emphasis on great choreography, and this weird sound effect they decided to go with anytime someone gets slashed made it even worse. At the end, guys, I enjoyed this crossover for what it was, I guess, but I wish it was better. For the type of event it was supposed to be, I don't think it lived up to the expectations. I'm going to give Zatoichi Meet Yojimbo a 6.5 out of 10. Zatoichi goes to the Fire Festival. Okay, let me just say this. The title of this movie is funny as hell. If you know, you know. This movie follows Ichi as that's it. This movie just follows Ichi. Zatoichi Goes to the Fire Festival is the first movie in this series that has no direction. The plot goes left, comes right, takes a U-turn, then goes south. You know, when the credits were rolling at the beginning and I saw the name Tatsuya Nakadai, I jumped off my seat because not only is Nakadai one of my favorite Japanese actors ever, he also always brings entertainment and top-class performances in any movie he's in. So to say I was excited would be an understatement. But then I realized it was barely in the movie.
How the fuck would you show me something if I couldn't have it?
This entry has one big problem in my eyes. It's got like 2 or 3 different storylines competing with one another. And the thing is, they all seem like fun stories. One is Zatoichi and Nakadai's character being in a cat and mouse chase because Nakadai's character believes Ichi to be one of the guys who slept with his wife before he killed her. The other one is a rom-com with Ichi and the gay character played by Shinosuke Ikehata. All their scenes together were hilarious and I wouldn't mind watching a whole movie with them. This scene was probably one of the funniest scenes in the series, and the fact that a scene like this exists in a movie that came out in the 70s is mind-blowing to me. And lastly, there's the storyline where Ichi goes against the blind mob boss who wants him dead, which is also the story that gets the most screen time. The result of this conflicting approach is that the movie is kind of a mess, but the surprising part is that it kind of works for this movie. The storylines merged together makes this village feel lived in. And after a while, it really feels like we are just following Ichi in one of the craziest weeks he's ever had. And I feel like the filmmakers made it work to some extent. Its lack of focus taints the movie for sure. But the movie in itself is entertaining, well directed, the cast is amazing, it's got some memorable moments and the fight scenes are fun to watch. I did not love it, but I would be lying if I said I did not have a lot of fun with this one. I don't even care that there's literally a part in the movie that feels like an ending just for the movie to keep going for another 35 minutes. I don't care about the noticeable dull, Ichi magically getting through flames or Nakadai being wasted. Oh no. Actually, I'm kind of salty about that one, I won't lie. Anyway, I'm giving Zatoichi Goes to the Jaru Festival a 6 out of 10. Moving on, Zatoichi and the One-Armed Swordsman. Oh my god.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
Honestly, after Zatoichi Goes to the Fire Festival and the disappointment that was Zatoichi Meets Yojimbo, I just made peace with the fact that the series was on autopilot from that point on. So going into this movie, my expectations were extremely low. And I'm glad to realize that the series not only still got a pulse, but it has pretty much risen like the phoenix from its ashes. Zatoichi and the One-Armed Swordsman is one of the best in the series, and one of my new favorites. The movie follows Zatoichi as he comes across a Chinese kid and the One-Armed Swordsman who are on the run trying to escape the government officials chasing after them. First of all, let me just say that this is exactly the type of crossover I hoped Zatoichi Meets Yojimbo was going to be. It's not just a story where we get 2 recognizable characters fighting each other. It actually takes the story seriously. This movie has symbolisms and metaphors. It's got great fight scenes and get both characters enough time to shine. And most of all, it's a very well written tale. Jimmy Wong Yu took his iconic character, the One-Armed Swordsman, from China's wuxia genre to the Chanbara genre, and the result is a perfect blend between Chinese and Japanese culture. I'm a big fan of Jimmy Wang and what it has done for Chinese cinema. His run in the 60s with the One-Armed Swordsman trilogy led to another iconic run in the 70s with the One-Armed Boxer film series. Fun fact, I actually had to look up if he was crippled in real life as well, because every time I had seen this guy on TV, he only had one arm. But apparently his other arm worked just fine. Good for him. His completely different style of fighting compared to Zatoichi was a breath of fresh air. Zatoichi has always used his sophisticated and slick moves to slash his enemies. Then you have Wang Kang just leaping into the air like he had some superpowers or something. He brought the goofiness of the wuxia genre here, but there was enough balance not to make it distracting. They paid homage to the wuxia genre, but they did not let it completely take over this movie, and I think this was the right decision as it helped preserve the tone and atmosphere of the series. By the way, I have no idea why the one-armed swordsman seems to have a different name in this movie. From what I know, his name in those movies was Wang Feng, but here he goes by Wang Kang, which is a bit confusing to me, but I haven't watched those movies in a fairly long time, so maybe I'm missing something. Another thing I loved about this movie was the final duel. If you know me, then you know that one of my favorite things to do in this series is rate final duels, and this one is definitely up there with the best duels in the series. Not just because of the choreography, but because of why it happened. Zatoichi had mentioned earlier in that film that it's crazy to him that two human beings can understand each other, as he was struggling to communicate with the Chinese swordsman. Later on, the one-armed swordsman suspects that Zatoichi had betrayed him, and when he comes face to face with Zatoichi, Zatoichi tries to explain to him that they are not enemies, but he can't understand what Zatoichi is saying, so they end up fighting, and spoiler, Zatoichi kills him. The writers here made the interesting choice of giving only one character the ability to understand both languages, and that character is just a child who barely understands the concept of translation. They did that to make it just clear enough for both characters to understand each other at the beginning and to know they were on the same side, but confusing enough to make this duel work, especially considering the fact that the child is not there to clear the air. The confusion and misunderstanding created some very fun scenes and also gave the writers the opportunity to comment on conflicts between China and Japan, which is made very clear when Zatoichi mumbles, "We could have avoided this tragedy if only we could understand each other," as he walks away from the one-armed swordsman's dead corpse. By the way, it's crazy, but apparently there's an alternate version of the duel in the Chinese version of the movie where the one-armed swordsman wins the duel and kills Zatoichi, which is insane, and trust me, I've looked everywhere for that version and I wish I could find it because that just reinforces my belief that the filmmakers used this movie to try and preach to both Chinese and Japanese, using their favorite heroes to do it. So it makes sense that the Chinese version has the one-armed swordsman saying that he wished they understood each other and that the fight would have been avoided if they did. This movie is very conceptual, even in the way it executes its fight scenes. It's a very violent and bloody film, but it gets very creative with the way it uses violence. I mean, this is a movie where Zatoichi cuts someone's ear off to force the truth out of him, and the scene where he cuts the guy's arm on the table is just... What can I say? I love movies with actual concept and something to say. This movie had a voice, and the execution was even better. The cinematography wasn't the best, but I've watched movies in the series with great cinematography but crappy characters and a bad script, so I will not even hold it against the movie, especially considering the fact that it's not bad, it's just not mind-blowing. I really can't complain. After the series' big break, Zatoichi meets Yojimbo made me believe that the creators just decided the movies were just going to be generic stories with celebrity cameos. And this movie, to be fair, just continues that newly established tradition, but it does it right. This is the best example on how a crossover should be executed, and I believe Kanshi Muzawa and the rest of the team were extremely proud of their work on this one. I'm giving Zatoichi and the One-Armed Swordsman a 7.9 out of 10. Moving on. Zatoichi at large. If I had to describe Zatoichi at large in one word, that word would be badass. On the road, Zatoichi comes across a wounded woman who had just been attacked and robbed. He also finds out that the lady is pregnant, so as someone always willing to help, he delivers the baby in one of the most uncomfortable scenes I've seen so far in the series. Unfortunately for Zatoichi, the mother dies immediately after, and Zatoichi is left with the baby on his hands and the name of the father he has to find. At the beginning, I genuinely thought the series was trying to make yet another fight Zatoichi fight. I mean, last time they tried, they ended up with an even better film called Zatoichi Challenge. But here's the thing, this movie is not like that at all. Yes, Zatoichi has to take care of a child for maybe 10 minutes in this 1 hour and 30 minutes film. The plot completely switches as soon as he reaches the town where the baby's father is from. And as expected, there's a Yakuza boss involved, and of course that Yakuza boss wants Zatoichi dead. And of course the people related to that baby have issues with the Yakuza boss. And of course Ichi is going to help and save them from the villain. You get the idea. Zatoichi at large does almost nothing original. At times it even felt like deja vu, especially when the Yakuza boss is played by an actor who has played a Yakuza boss before in the series. Because of that, the movie can feel redundant to some degree, but fortunately for Zatoichi at large, and fortunately for me, who had to sit through it, it manages to be an extremely entertaining entry in this series. The second act is probably the weakest because at some point the movie is forced to slow down, and in my opinion, I think it slowed down a little too much, so the pace seemed off. But as soon as it picked back up, it was a blast until the very end. Zatoichi at large is one of the best, if not the best third act in the series. The build up to it was incredible. Then there was Zatoichi fighting an army of Yakuza who kind of felt like zombies. Because regardless of how many of them he killed, more and more Yakuza kept showing up. This is the first time Zatoichi didn't even get to kill everyone and walk off. He literally had to run away. The choreography in the third act was outstanding. The cinematography was incredible, and this movie's biggest asset is without a doubt its score and just the music overall. The music gave the whole thing its own unique environment and vibe. The tone of the music was a bit western-ish, but with that samurai touch. The final shot as Zatoichi disposes of the Yakuza who challenged him earlier, accompanied by the badass soundtrack, was just... Honestly, after all this time, it is so encouraging to know that the series still has some juice left. Hopefully, the remaining films keep getting better. I'm giving Zatoichi at large a 6.9 out of 10. Zatoichi in Desperation. Zatoichi in Desperation is an insane movie. I don't even think I can accurately describe how insane this movie is to me. Now, first of all, what this movie made me realize is that this series has kind of taken a dark turn. In the previous one, we saw a pregnant woman getting murdered. In this one, we witnessed the death of an old lady in the very first scene. Then we are immediately presented with the scene where a bunch of villagers discover a man who had just hanged himself, as the title card appears. This is an insane way of opening your movie. It's important to know that this movie is directed by Shintaro Katsu himself. This is the first movie he directed in the series and one of the few movies he directed in his career. He will go on to direct the 26th and final film in the series, and from what I can tell, he's more into dark and depressing tones based on these opening sequences alone. This is a story where Zatoichi wanders around aimlessly as he comes across an old woman who accidentally falls into a river trying to have a conversation with him. Zatoichi feels bad about it and decides to embark on a mission of trying to find the old woman's daughter. I won't lie, this movie is pretty well structured in the first act. Our main protagonist had a believable motivation. The old woman's daughter, Nishikigi, turned out to be a subversive character that looked and felt nothing like previous female side characters, which was a nice touch, and there was even a side plot with this lady named Kaede and this little boy, which helped establish the misery of this place and built up the villains of the story. After the first act, I genuinely thought this was going to become one of my top favorites in the series. But then, the second half of the movie happened and the movie started to lose me a little bit. See, the movie has this very entertaining and engaging scene where Zatoichi tricks all the Yakuza into betting all their money on the wrong pair of dice. He strips them of all their money to pay for Nishikigi's freedom. Great plot points. However, the moment he buys the girl's freedom, the movie kind of stalls for a while. It's like the movie did not know where it wanted to go from there. The girl became irrelevant to the plot and Zatoichi had no other motivation. So the movie could have just ended the moment he freed the girl, but it kept going and I was just sitting there asking myself why I was still watching this thing. Because what follows is a bunch of scenes of Nishikigi trying to get Zatoichi to sleep with her and Zatoichi pushing her away over and over again. And story-wise, that just felt sloppy and aimless. I will give this movie credit though for being extremely bold and boundless. I mean, this is a movie where a guy beats the hell out of a child. So much he ends up dead. And they show the whole thing, down to the kid's corpse in the casket. Shintaro Katsu as a director has no chill, and I wish he directed more films in the series. This movie is also incredibly bloody, and I have to say, the scene where Zatoichi gets his hand stabbed was quite tense, but unfortunately, it was ruined by plot contrivance. The villains have Zatoichi cornered. They strip him of his cane. He is defenseless. They can end his life right there. But they decide to stab his hands and give him back his cane and let him know that they will be coming for him the next day to kill him. Are you kidding me? Why are you not just killing him right there? Are you f***ing stupid? And of course, they show up to his hideout the next day and he kills them all without breaking a sweat. The end. Honestly, this is a movie that had a lot of potential, but got in its own way and crashed and burned at the end. But I wouldn't call it a bad movie or anything. It's just fine. I enjoyed it for what it was, I guess. Anyway, I'm giving Zatoichi in Desperation a 6.5 out of 10. Moving on. Zatoichi's Conspiracy. This movie was officially the last entry in the Shintaro Katsu era of Zatoichi. 25 movies in 11 years. All with the same actor in the main role. One of the greatest achievements in cinematic history. I know today it's become common for franchises to run for that long, but Zatoichi is definitely one of the first film series to achieve such a feat. And honestly, it's also one of the rare series of films to never completely collapse due to the insane amount of output. However, does this movie do a good job as a final film in the series? Unfortunately, no. It does not. Zatoichi's Conspiracy is a movie that's very hard to review because it really didn't provoke any emotion in me. I'm not mad at it. It didn't make me excited. It didn't make me laugh. It didn't annoy me, offend me, or even frustrate me. In other words, this movie was boring as shit. The best example of how incredibly boring this movie was is the fact that there is no fight scene until the 50th minute. Zatoichi's Conspiracy is so boring that I had to watch people talk about things that were not even interestingly set up for nearly an hour until any action could happen. Normally, when a movie chooses not to focus on action, it's because the filmmakers are confident enough in the drama within the story. But the thing is, there is no interesting drama that justifies such a slow pace in this movie. The plot of the movie is literally just Zatoichi returning to his childhood village. And just like what we have seen before, he finds corruption and abuse of power, and as always, he steps in and saves the day. There's nothing exceptionally dramatic about the story. So what this movie forces the audience to sit through is businessmen and Yakuza plotting how they were going to screw the villagers over, and this guy talking about how horny he is. And listen, I have given this series a big pass in the past for inconsistency in the story. But this is the last straw for me. You cannot tell me that this sorry place is where Zatoichi grew up when we had already established in the past what his childhood home was, and it was not this. And this lady they keep talking about that reportedly raised Zatoichi doesn't make sense when considering everything we have learned about Ichi so far. There is also no mention of his brother or how he lost his sight or was separated from his father. If he was old enough to remember being separated from his father, then when did he get to this village? How long did he live here for? When did this old lady raise him? When did he get to grow up with his brother? When did he lose his sight? Was it as a child or as an adult? What about Chiyo? Was that all bullshit? This timeline makes no freaking sense. Anyway, I've stopped caring about continuity when it comes to this series. Like I said, each movie has been treated like its own story for quite a while now. They no longer care about continuity, so I shouldn't either. And me talking about continuity instead of this movie just shows how boring this thing was to me. No memorable character, no memorable villain. Even Shintaro Katsu looked bored out of his mind. I bet he wishes he directed this one as well. Anyway, I've got nothing constructive to say about this movie, except that it's a mediocre one. And I'll give it a 5 out of 10. 16 years after Zatoichi's conspiracy and 27 years after the tale of Zatoichi, Shintaro Katsu decides to return as the blind swordsman for one last foray in the 26th Zatoichi film, Zatoichi, Darkness is His Ally, or as I like to call it, Old Man Ichi. Yeah, that should have been the title. Shintaro Katsu also wrote and directed the film, and the guy goes back to his unique vision for this character as seen in Zatoichi in Desperation. Katsu clearly has a taste for dark and serious films, and the tone of his entry just proves that. This movie is dark, depressing, violent, and quite explicit. In one of the very first scenes in the movie, Zatoichi is literally folding a guy like a flannel coat, and in the final showdown, Zatoichi shows up with the guy's head in his hands. And as someone who had begged the saga to be as violent as possible to make the fight scenes believable, I couldn't be happier. Shintaro Katsu also clearly wrote a love letter to the series he had been a part of for 2 decades. Nearly 3 decades if you count this one. And you can feel his passion for the series and love for the character throughout the film, with various callbacks only Zatoichi fans will recognize, like the trick he did during the dice game taken straight from Zatoichi in Desperation, the candle on the sword popularized by Zatoichi's flashing sword in 1964, Zatoichi falling in a hole despite being warned about it by kids is a scene straight out of Zatoichi's flashing sword as well, and even this scene is a callback to Zatoichi at large. Like I said, this movie seems a lot like an homage to the series overall, and unfortunately, that's also its biggest problem. Making a movie about an old Zatoichi should come with the desire to at least give the character a proper send-off, using a story that challenges a particular belief or gives the character the opportunity to get some sort of closure as the series concludes. But here, Shintaro Katsu just went back to the source and simply collected ideas from much better films to make something that has nothing unique to offer, story-wise. When the movie begins, Zatoichi is in prison, being punished. I thought this was interesting. I thought that would lead somewhere, but no. It was probably just meant as a callback to Zatoichi and the Doomed Man, a movie that also opens with Zatoichi in prison. Once Zatoichi is done killing everyone as he always does, he walks away having learned nothing new, and without any sort of story choice that suggests that this is goodbye or that the audience should let go, as they will never see him again. In other words, you can skip this movie entirely and just stop at the 25th one and you won't miss a thing. The editing is also disjointed, with fight scenes poorly cut at times. Not all the times, but yeah, the editing is quite sloppy in some places. It's distracting. This is also the one and only Zatoichi film set in the 80s. And you can tell by the music, of course. Remember when I was talking about editing? This applies to music as well. I like the typical 80s music. It really puts a stamp on the time this movie was made. But they started using it so much, it started to become distracting. Like this scene where these guys hear a gunshot, and there is like this suspense to see who's coming. And this is the music they play right after the gunshot. Like, why? This movie also contains the first nude scene ever in the series and the second sex scene involving Zatoichi. So let me get this straight. Zatoichi has had sex on screen only twice, in Zatoichi in Desperation and this movie, and both were directed by Shintaro Katsu himself? Damn, Shintaro. I wasn't familiar with your game, bro. This movie was also kind of a disaster behind the scenes. Shintaro Katsu's son, Ryotaro Gun, who plays one of the bad guys in the film, accidentally stabbed one of his co-stars in the neck, killing him. Gun thought he was using a prop sword, which turned out to be a real sword. Meanwhile, Shintaro Katsu was using a real sword for his fight scene while keeping his eyes closed the entire time for authenticity. So in other words, Katsu was swinging a real sword at his crew with his eyes closed to make the fight scene look real? That's kind of insane when you think about it. If all of that resulted in a masterpiece of a film, maybe it would have been worth it, but I'm sad to report that it wasn't really worth it at all. This is another mediocre Zatoichi entry, I'm sorry. I'm giving Old Man Ichi a 5.5 out of 10. And now it's time to rank them all. If you have been following these reviews, then you probably have a good idea on where each film stands in terms of ranking. Given how big this whole saga is, I have decided not to do a typical ranking and opted for a tier list instead. So here it is. At the top, you have two of my favorites, Zatoichi Challenge and The New Tale of Zatoichi, of course. In the great category, you have The Tale of Zatoichi, Zatoichi on the Road, Zatoichi and the Chest of Gold, Fight Zatoichi Fights, Zatoichi's Vengeance, and Zatoichi meets the One-Armed Swordsman. In the mediocre category, you have Zatoichi the Fugitive, Zatoichi and the Doomed Man, Zatoichi and the Chess Experts, Zatoichi's Conspiracy, and Zatoichi Darkness is his ally. In the skip category, there is only one movie I will never recommend to anyone ever, and that is of course Zatoichi the Outlaw. Everything else is in the okay category. Movies that aren't great, but not bad either. Well, we have done it.
It's done.
We have gone through every single Zatoichi movie starring Shintaro Katsu. A round of applause for myself, please. These reviews took nearly a year to complete, and given how huge it was, I didn't want the channel to pause as I go through these movies, so I had to stop working on these reviews and make other videos in between. And that's the reason it took this long. But at the end, I had so much fun doing this. In fact, I enjoyed it so much that I will make it a tradition every year to go through a series of films that I like but never reviewed before. A few weeks ago, I put up a poll and you guys chose Lone Wolf and Cub as the next series of films you would like me to review. So look out for that early next year. I know the title of these reviews is Understanding Zatoichi, and after nearly a year of watching Zatoichi movies almost exclusively, I can say that the only thing that we need to understand about him is that he is a protector with a big heart. His backstory doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter whether he lost his sight at 2 years old or at 16. His altruistic nature is what we should all aspire to, and since we can't swing our swords around to help people out, all we can do is show appreciation to people who support us. That's our way of honoring Zatoichi and his altruistic spirit. So that's why we carried out a giveaway of the Zatoichi box sets. At Victor Sweeney 29, congratulations on winning the contest. I don't know if you made it this far in the video, but in case you didn't, you should see an email pop up anytime now. Thank you for your support. We will do the same giveaway for Lone Wolf and Cub as well, so make sure to stay tuned. Phew, well, that's it. Job done. I'm going to go and have a long nap now. And well, until next time. Ciao.